Close your eyes. We're going on a fantasy epic adventure. Your companions are a warrior elf and a wizened wizard. What do they look like? If you pictured Orlando Bloom or Ian McKellen or an illustration by Alan Lee, I understand completely. If you've played D&D, watched any adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, live action or animated, owned a Frank Frazetta wall calendar, or have a bookshelf dedicated to Wheel of Time, you've been exposed to the standard model for fantasy in every medium. It is fair-skinned, usually blonde, blue-eyed, and European in dress, imagery, and geography. But fantasy iconography and themes are universal across human cultures. What if you could play a tabletop, card-based fantasy combat game with mages, magic, and heroes that didn't come from the fantasy universe you're familiar with?
Hi, I'm James Ellerby. I work for a company called Previously Pluto, and we make out of this world games. And I am the lead game designer for a game called Magusha Clash of the Commanders.
Ellerby is an avid gamer and actor who got his start in game production when one of his friends, a game designer, was looking for someone to film and do production work on a new project. You may already know his work if you've played The Big Shuffle, another tabletop game by Philadelphia-based Previously Pluto, or if you've seen it at a convention as 001, the Scottish robot in their to-be-released sci-fi visual novel game Oddware. He is the lead designer of Magusha, Clash of the Commanders. Today on the HoCast, history, ontology, epistemology, we explore Afro-Fantasy through a tabletop card game that breaks tropes and looks and plays great doing it.
Magusha Clash of the Commanders is an Afro-Fantasy tactical battle card game in which you take control of a powerful commander who has basically a small-scale army. And your job is to outmaneuver and outstrike your opponent, who also has a commander and an army. And you'll be taking turns commanding, moving, and attacking, and eliminating pieces from the board until all that's left is the commander. And when the last commander is standing, with their actual troops still in the field or in their hands, wins the game. So it's a game about strategy, it's a game about tactical gameplay, but it's also a game about all full-scale warfare and just slugging each other as hard as you can, right? And it's also pretty fast-paced. Most matches will last about 15 to 20 minutes. And we want you to go fast, win or lose, and then start up again, and then run another one. And we made it so that at the starting, you'll have your choice of 2 different commanders per faction. And each commander changes the way that entire army will play. They have very big effects that'll change the way that that style of gameplay will happen. And then we added a new thing called Magusha. So the commanders, after they've taken so much battle damage or have lost so many troops, they'll get to flip over and become more powerful, and they get new abilities, offer new strategies, and try to turn the tide. This is like a super move in fighting games, right? Like your ultimate move in fighting games. Yeah. But it also will open up different play styles too, because there's some people who might want to try to win the battle before getting to Magusha. Others might want to rush to Magusha right away, so they're as powerful as possible to try to overwhelm. Magusha has different ways of playing, different styles, and fun, unique characters and classes to embody and commanders to pilot with. So, yeah.
Magusha takes place in Padun. Magic in Padun is called Magu. In Magusha, all magic, Magu, is performed through stones. Fire stones, water stones. It's elemental magic. You get it. There are water warriors called the Imonjani, fire wielders called the Kilishe. Your commanders are Rexar, Kayan, Orkan. When I tell you James spoke for over an hour about the lore of Magusha, I mean he covered the history of the peoples and factions, their gods and how they worship them, their myths, their journey to Padun, how they use Magu, and some of the specific rituals and rules of the magic system, the geography of Padun, the characters' biology, politics, and roots of the conflicts between factions. This is a story he's been developing for over 5 years. These character backstories influence abilities and game mechanics. And the plot he's laid out is your motivation for sitting across the table from your opponent. Like Magic or Pokemon, this is a world you're immersed in and you're fighting for it. The Kickstarter went live in May. It was successfully funded, and full disclosure, I backed Magusha, and I'm really excited to play this game when it arrives on my doorstep.
I've always loved TCGs and obviously fantasy too, but I've always been a big fan of Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, but even more because I'm a weirdo and I had little money. So me and my brother would go to a shop called Warlord's Den in Lebanon, PA. And like we'd take our allowance from like the week, right? And you'd be like, "Oh man, what new magic cards are there?" And they're like, "Here's the new magic set, like Ravenica or whatever." And we're like, "How much is it?" And they're like, "Here's the pack." We're like, "What's the oldest set for Magic?" Or like, "What are some other card games that are cheaper?" And we would start exploring these like weird games that like weren't like the main big ones. And we would always just sit down and remember we'd just go at it each other, try to figure out the rules. But well, you can't do that. Wait, my card says you can. Wait, that. So like the gaming and especially tabletop and board game landscaping has changed since I was a kid. And such a great direction, right? More people are now into it, right? And you have this crossover of people trying to relive their childhoods and new people who are like, well, I never got into gaming, but I really want to. And then they get in. But I wanted to kind of give a new experience to an old feeling. So Magusha came out of my love of TCGs, my love of board games, but also the desire of, I grew up not seeing any games or general fantasy stuff that had Black people in it. Or if it did, it had a very distinctive look, right? We were always in turbans, right? It was always in turban. And don't get me wrong, I love me some turban Black people. I am a big Elder Scrolls fan, and I always play a red guard. But there's more. And when I got into a position where I could design, I was like, well, I don't see it. Might as well make it.
When The Rings of Power came out in 2022, there was to be expected complaining about the storyline, as much of the material had to be expanded, speculated if you will, because it was pulled from the loose chronology of events laid out in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. There was another complaint too. There were Black and brown actors cast as elves. When Disney released a live-action Little Mermaid in 2023, singer, songwriter, and actress Halle Bailey was cast as Ariel. For unfamiliar with her work, she is a Black woman. And though mermaids are fictional, half-human, half-fish, usually, creatures whose skin in global mythologies can range from actually white to purple, and the previous Disney incarnation was an animated cartoon, there were complaints that legitimately said things like, quote, mermaids are white women.
In the 90s, my mom was very into the Pan-African movement and decking out the house and beautiful sculptures and beautiful artwork and, African lions and elephants and zebras and stuff like that. Like my mom's house looked like Coming to America. That's literally what it was. And I love so that just was kind of like that feel for me, right? And I never lost that. I think there is. Again, I am a child of two worlds. I grew up as a foster kid, so I had visitations with my family once a week. But most of the time, I lived with, for lack of a better word, white people. Right? I lived in white foster homes, and but I got to experience both of those worlds. Right? So like, I never lost that cultural connection, but I also got to experience it from those different angles. And what I've learned is just even meeting other Black people who were raised similar to me or had their own kind of thing going on, or the people that like were raised within Black homes, there's always that little bit of, where do we come from? It's that identity. I don't want to call it, it's not a crisis. I think there was always a drive to know, where are our stories? And not just slave stories and not just, Jim Crow era, but like before that, the old stories, the old tales, the old mythology, like the old lore. One of the truth about Black people, we're all nerds. We're all a bunch of nerds. Most Black people are nerds, have some kind of nerddom inside, and we love fantasy. We love sci-fi. We love these mythological stories. But growing up in America, we are always told these stories through a very Western European lens. And then a very interesting thing that I've gotten to visually see is that we've now also been seeing a lot more stories from the Asian or East Asian lens as well, as anime and video games became more popular and, Japan dominating a lot of that kind of cultural influence. You go to any convention nowadays, you'll see Black guys dressed up as, Inuyasha and Goku, you know what I mean? And all those kind of Luffy, from One Piece. And again, those are great. I love those. I am also a nerd and I have also done those things. But I was always like, but there's a whole continent that we come from, or at least our ancestors come from, that has little to no references that we can pull from, that we can grow, that we can expand upon and tell stories about. So I was raised with the understanding that there was more to my culture than the American side of African American. I was raised with the understanding that there was an African side. But when it came down to actually crafting the world of Magusha, I pulled from that. I pulled from my love of fantasy and the stories and fantasy I grew up with. And then I was like, and then we did the research, right? Because you do have to, you got to do your work. My big inspiration is Tolkien. I don't just love, the story of Lord of the Rings, but I love the creation and the reflections of the author of Tolkien, understanding that he was a linguistics professor, right? Essentially, Lord of the Rings is, I wanted to make a language. Here's my entire world to give me reason to make this language, right? And then The Hobbit. Well, all The Hobbit was him reading bedtime story to his kids, right? And now we look at it as the definitive backbone of what is Western fantasy, right? But ultimately, it was a passion project. It was all passion. He had a passion, and then a world grew out of it. Well, my passion is African culture. My passion is fantasy. And when you take those two and marry them together, that's what Magusha is.
The gaming industry has made leaps and strides in the past few years to relatively low levels of backlash. 2017's Video Game of the Year, Horizon Zero Dawn, featured a female protagonist wearing actual armor instead of boob enhancers, though technically this is sci-fi, still counts. There were some complaints that Aloy was ugly, but since the title sold over 24 million copies, I suppose they got over it. The RPG Coyote and Crow was released in 2021 and was set in an alternative history where North America was never colonized. A small but vocal minority claimed the game was not for white people because you were, quote, pretending to be indigenous. The creator of the game, Kenneth Alexander, called this criticism out for the disingenuous argument that it was. In a blog post headlined, "White people, you can play Coyote and Crow, for fuck's sake." The game is a bestseller that has won multiple awards. Clearly, not all fantasy games have to be literal white knights, fair elves, and castles.
The first visual character that we made, Kiana, when we were designing Kiana's armor was, and she was beautiful. She's modeled after my niece Tiana, who's also a Marine. I'm a proud uncle. But Kiana started off as black girl in a European knight armor with some cowrie shells and like some little bits and baubles of African design. But it was basically just take European, put a black person in it. And we knew it was wrong. After we made it, we were kind of looking at, again, my artists are phenomenal because, and the mark of their skill is that we were able to sit down and go, something's wrong about this. And actually it was my boss, Ken, the head of Previously Pluto, who challenged us and said, is this Afro fantasy or is this a black person in European fantasy? And we were just like, that's what it is. And we came together and just redesigned all of what Kiana was supposed to be and built from the ground up. The Imanjani were already a people, like I had already written who they were. But as far as what they look like, that visual, taking something from words to a visual character design is a journey. And that journey was filled with us going, okay, so what do coastal African people look like? What is the fantasy behind what are stories that are told from West Africa? What are stories that are and we took bits and pieces of both reality and fantasy and history and lore and came up with who the Imanjani were. And that's kind of been with that creation, we cemented that as our guiding star going forward for the entire world.
Africa is an enormous continent that has been home to thousands of individual cultures. Merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, diplomats, artisans, and other visitors traveling through Europe and Asia throughout history carried with them the seeds of influence from their own ancient tales. If you heard Aesop's fables as a child, those are heavily influenced by African imagery. And some researchers theorize that the storyteller's name Aesop derives from the ancient Greek term for Ethiopian. But it was the African diaspora, driven by the transatlantic slave trade, that brought African folklore to Europe and then to the Western Hemisphere, where the lives of those uprooted continued under slavery, sharing their stories by word of mouth, as they were when humans were first gathered around fires. The stories change and adapt over time to reflect current events, so that now the term Afro-Lore encompasses the stories shared by people scattered throughout the Caribbean and Americas, central to their identity as people from the African continent, but forever changed by colonization and slavery.
I knew that in creating Magusha, we wanted an Afro-Fantasy story. One of the things I love about Previously Pluto and my boss Ken, first of all, that man is amazing. He is phenomenal. Um, Honestly, he's been one of my best friends for a very long time. He is a creative himself, but also he teaches art design at Drexel, or did, and he is a very artistically minded man. Now, even though this is my project, it is his company, and me and him had talked about, like, what is Afro fantasy, what does it look like? And we don't know. So we went on this journey of, has Afro fantasy ever been defined as an art style? And we couldn't find any definitives of that. There's people who have drawn Afro fantasy things, of course, and Afro fantasy exists. It is a genre, but there was no definitive art style to that genre. And Ken proposed a challenge to myself as the director and to the artists. Let's make one. Let's make Afro fantasy as a definitive art style. What does that look like? How do you express Afro in colors? And there was a lot of talking with the artists and myself. Amos Comet and Koi Doodles are the two lead artists that are the head of the project. Working with both of them, we came up with this idea of unapologetic color. One of my biggest fears for Magusha was, how do you stand out? At a convention, there's tons of fantasy out there. Tons. Everywhere you look, there's an elf and a dwarf, right? And again, no problem with it. I love me some elves and dwarves, right? Yeah, the unapologetic color was our guiding star. In the acting industry, how I was trained in acting was, one of my old directors, John Williams, amazing black man for the New Jersey Renaissance Fair, said, give me 200% and I'll tell you when to go back. And I wanted to apply that to the Afro fantasy when it comes to representing the beauty of Afro. And I say Afro culture because it's not just African, but we took a look at the African diaspora, including African Americans, African Creole people, African, our lead artist is actually from Barbados, right? We have people that work on our team that are from Jamaica, right? Afro-Caribbean people as well. So Afro being an umbrella term for all of those. And when you look at all of those, one of the defining features of being Black is being unapologetically yourself, right? We sense when someone's being real. We sense when somebody's being fake, right? And we love when people are authentically themselves, and we're and unapologetically loud and culturally vibrant, right? So understanding that, I took that and when we went to the artist and we went, oh, here's the first draft. Cool, make it bigger. Here's the second draft, make it louder. Okay, what about this? That's what I'm talking about. Anytime someone said, is that too saturated? I was like, now we're getting into the realm of where we're at, right? In a world of color, be the brightest color, right? And that was, as a director, that was my guiding star for my artists. Go bigger, go more, add more culture into it. Well, we could do it. No, big, make it big, because how else we're going to stand out?
It may come as a surprise to you that a board game, or any game, must be written, that there are narratives for games outside the familiar RPGs, and those narratives that are tied to the mechanics of the game. Gaming is another part of the human experience just as intrinsic as storytelling, and together, storytelling and gaming are part and parcel of the same experience.
And gaming is such a huge umbrella term, right? Where I think a lot of people, especially even older heads who are now kind of understanding more, oh, wow, gaming is more than just Pong and Mario, right? It's huge, it's massive. And technically, it always has been massive. Games have existed in many different forms all over the world throughout human. The second we figured out, that we could play war or play hunt and not actually hurt or harm things, we were playing games, right? Gaming is a part of the human experience. Part of the gaming experience is there needs to be a narrative. Every gaming has a narrative. There's a reason why you have kings and queens on poker cards, right? And Magusha, being a fantasy world, it needs to be a world that has to be created and there has to be a story there. So no part of gaming lives in a vacuum. And storytelling is just as much part of gaming as crunching numbers, as working design, as drawing the art. But how do you tell a story in a game? Well, that's something that I'm new to, right? That's a new venture for me. I'm a child in that area. I know how to tell stories, but how do you convey a story to an artist, right? This is the amazing journey that I've been on with Magusha, is that I have phenomenally talented artists. So I joke around with my artists and other people all the time, and I say, "Hey, I'm just the crazy guy that goes, what if there were lizards with fire coming out of their hands? Ooh, right?" And to my mind, it sounds like lunacy. And my wife's over there laughing because she's like, "I married him," you know what I mean? But my artists go, "Okay, so what shape is the fire? What does it turn into? Where does the fire come from? And tell us the story about why these lizards are shooting fire. Is it part of their culture? Did they get, forced to doing this? Are they slaves? Like, are they workers?
Process
Is there
of casting a spell?
exactly right? And to me, I downplay the role of storytelling so much to my artists, but my artists always remind me. They go, "We can't draw a blank page, right?" And my artists are constantly telling me, "The more you tell us about your world, the better we can bring it to life."
Most people are familiar with ancient Egypt and much of its culture. It was a month-long unit in my junior high school social studies classes. Even Carthage gets some coverage, but mostly in the context of ancient Rome. The great pre-colonial African kingdoms and empires of Axum, Numidia, Nubia, Ashanti, Congo, Mali, Zimbabwe, Songhai, Benin, Ife, and Oyo are rarely touched on unless you're taking advanced world history and African history courses in college.
I think there are more Black people today that could tell you Japanese mythology before they could tell you West African mythology. It is the fallout of a cultural separation, right? When I say Black specifically, Black very much does identify you as an African American, which, and I still use that terminology because culturally speaking, we are American. We are just as American as everybody else. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, right? Right? Like I'm an Eagles fan, right? Sorry, Baltimore listeners. You know what I mean? Like apple pie, Johnny Cat. Like I'm still American, right? Like Martin Luther King. We still have all of those identifiers of that. But let's put it this way: St. Patrick's Day just passed by, and the entire country celebrated Irish heritage. As a kid, I learned about Irish heritage, right? I know what a leprechaun is. Why do I know what a leprechaun is, right? Because it's part of the American story, the American experience. But there's reasons as to why our full stories haven't been told, right? As a child of trauma, because we all are children of trauma, but as a child of trauma, we can claim injustice, and I will, obviously, but we still have to accept and deal and live with the reality that was given to us, right? Deal with the cards. What is it Gandalf says? It is what we do with the time that we are given us, right? And I, again, foster kid, was born with HIV, right? Like I've had I have my struggles growing up, but I will never knock something else because I struggled. I will always go, "Hey, I struggled. We struggled too. That makes us family. That makes us together." But I also want it to be known that, and especially in today's climate, that the search for Afro stories and Black stories and African diasporic stories is not a erasure or a lack of love of American stories. It's just the missing piece that was denied us. And when something is denied you, especially as a child, when you become an adult, it unfortunately becomes now up to you to get that back. Sucks that those are the cards. Them's the breaks, kid, right? But and that was kind of my thing, right? There were no Afro fantasy. Not there were no Afro fantasy. There's tons of writers and artists and illustrators out there that are making amazing Afro fantasy stuff and talking about things like the Orisha and West African pantheons. Um, but I hadn't seen it in a game form and the game design space, and that was the space that I was in. So that's why I wanted to create that. But there are tons of stories that we can pull from and interject them into the world of fantasy and give people and I think to me that's what makes it different. That's what makes it new. That combined with a dope art style, uh, you know, it grabs people. It pulls people and they go, "I've never heard this story before." You know, there's dwarves to my left, elves to my right, and then you have the Munjani. Well, who are they? I don't know that story. Cool. Now you will, right?
My name is Paul D. Best. I am a storyteller, a writer, and an educator. And everything I do kind of falls under those three umbrellas. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana. Moved to Philly. It'll be 10 years next week. My background, I've done work in middle school. I taught middle school. I was a photographer for 12 years, ran a studio out of Indianapolis. I've always worked with youth in some capacity. No matter what I was doing, I tried to make space for young people. And now I'm working in museums, doing storytelling and education at the same time. Primarily here at the Independent Seaport Museum, oral history, and at the Penn Museum, museum educator. So teaching anthropology and archaeology in a way that's approachable and understandable for the everyday person.
I was introduced to Paul through some colleagues I used to work with at the Penn Museum. I was looking for an expert in African storytelling who could help talk about why our fantasy tales in America are so white.
Because Africa is not a monolith, it's always people think of the continent and think of just one people, and it's not. It is thousands of cultures and faiths, ideas, customs, beliefs. There might be some through lines and some commonalities in a lot of them, but you really have to treat them all as separate. You can look at different civilizations and different people, and you can see a progression. So, for example, Egypt. Egypt, we see once the old kingdom collapsed, we saw a change in the stories. So, like the story of like creation and how things ran. So we see that Osiris goes back into the heavens, kind of like leaving the people to fend for themselves. And we see these stories often correlated with historical events, whether it was like wars, migration, the lore, the folklore, the stories, the myths always seem to be parallel. So Osiris goes back into the sky, and the people are fending for themselves. So now we see like, oh, the Nile River is flooding, and now there's famine, and there's war, and now, we're being attacked, and we're being colonized, things like that. And so you can see that in different civilizations, different cultures. Creation stories, you see a lot of creation stories where we're explaining how the world was created. If you look in the Yoruba people, the Orishas, which were deities that kind of reflected just science and nature, essentially. They would, be deities over this. Olodumare was like the main guy. And you will see that like Shango was one, I believe, of metal, which actually is believed to be the inspiration of Thor. So, yeah. And you see different myths that were based off of rulers. These rulers that were so noble or accomplished so much, they were memorialized. And as time went on, the stories got more deeper and more grand. But it was a way of creating like cultural memory. So like you see that with like Shaka Zulu. There's some figures throughout various African cultures that we see today as like John Henry, High John the Conqueror. But these were after like the Zulu warriors. And so you see a way of, it built pride in people, but it also made sure that the stories weren't forgotten. And also there was values and cultural morals that were buried into these stories to keep the ideals of the people alive.
In every culture, there are universal themes and archetypes. Humans all recognize the character of the Elder Wise One, the hero, and the trickster. Every person on Earth knows a story about good versus evil, a hero's journey, a cautionary tale that teaches the consequences of greed and hubris, and stories that exemplify virtues, teaching the power of love and bravery. In West African folklore, the Jali and the Jali Muso are hereditary storytellers, preserving history for the next generation in the oral tradition. In English, we call them the griot. You may be familiar with the story of Anansi, the spider, who takes the role of the trickster and is one of the most important characters in Afro-Lore. In one tale, Anansi wanted to acquire the stories of the sky god, who held all the stories to himself. So Nyame tasks Anansi with several great challenges in exchange for them, much like the 12 labors of Hercules.
One of my favorite understandings of lore, especially with the African diaspora, is through sometimes they call it the Ma'afa or chattel slavery. I learned Ma'afa through the oral tradition. An elder said the word. You know, you ever heard of libations?
Yes.
So they were doing libations, and it's a lot of stories also in African tradition are tributes to ancestors. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge thing. The Sankofa, going back in order to move forward. So I heard the word in libations, and elder was like, the Ma'afa, the Ma'afa. And just from the context of what she was saying, I learned what it was. So with the Ma'afa, we see the stories were continued. So when we came, some by choice and many by force, they stripped us of so many things. One of the first things they did was cover our mouths. We can't talk. We can't use our language. They took the drum. The drum was huge in many African cultures because you're hearing drums was used for communications, drums was used for war, drums was used for so many things. So they stripped us of language, they stripped us of religion. So we see this idea of syncretism. When they stripped us of all these things, we had to find ways to keep it alive. And so, for example, with the drums was taken away. So here we see on the plantation now the use of our bodies. And you see the spoons. Have you ever heard of ham bone?
Yes.
Okay, so the ham bone, we're doing all these things because we're actually building a new culture. And people don't understand American culture is rooted in blackness and African culture. Food, music, all of that. But with the stories, now we see the animals that were in the folk tales and the myths in Africa. Now they are with us on the plantation. And that's when we start hearing stories like Brer Rabbit, Brother Fox, Brother Spot. The word Brer, B-R-E-R, is a word of brother. So now they're on the plantation, and then we start to see the folk tales. You've heard of like Uncle Remus. We starting to see, now the trickster isn't really tricking us. Now he's tricking Master. I'm like, oh, Master, are we sick? And then you hear all these stories of, running circles around Master, which were stories of like resistance and rebellion, and then we see the stories are now turning into ways of escape. And we hear it in songs. Follow the drinking gourd. The drinking gourd was the Big Dipper, and at the tip of the Big Dipper was the North Star. So we're here, storytelling now taking place through songs. We see the Negro spirituals having like hidden meaning. Wade in the water, children, because the hounds are chasing us. Wade in the water to lose the scent. There's so many different ways that you hear that. So I love the folk tales of like Brother Rabbit and Brother Fox, because now we see those same phenomenons we saw in Africa to explain things. Now we see this more modern, Americanized explanation. Despite the terrorism that's going on, we see the survival through the stories, and also the motives start to change, because now on the continent, stories had some wisdom that was tied to it for like good living and prosperity. But now in America, now you see black storytelling. Now these stories are now having a different hit. Some of these are for survival. I'm telling you these things to save your life. When we think of now stories of like Emmett Till, why don't we whistle in the South? Or why we cross the street in a sundown town, or when you see a white woman. There's all these stories now, and some of these now are real stories. Let me tell you the story about Uncle so-and-so. Let me tell you the story about Miss so-and-so. Because now I need you to hear these stories as a matter of survival. It's not just about the folklore and good times. You need to know how to navigate this country as a black person. As our stories are preserved, so are we as people. And that's huge in these days when things are just getting slashed and removed and erased and redlined. It's like the oral tradition, back to the oral tradition. You can't take this. It's never going to die. There's always going to be a remnant of people who remember, who are going to continue this story. So whatever you take off the shelves, whatever you take out the museum, trust me, it's going to still be here.
Whiteness is not a culture. It's a construct that has underpinned what is popular, promoted, and mainstream for centuries in the U.S. Capitalism caters to a white audience because white people hold the power, the influence, and the money. The white-centric monoculture reflects large systems of power. It is the normalization of white skin, white names, and the othering of cultures that don't just exist in our society, but do so in larger numbers than are represented in media, pop culture, and in everything from advertising to textbooks.
I mean, white supremacy. Like,
Say again?
White supremacy, that's the basis of, white supremacy is a machine that has many moving parts. And the goal of white supremacy is to keep everybody divided.
So, how do we get pop culture to reflect the people who consume it? How do we get more games like Magusha?
Any art medium that exists is responsible for telling the stories of the people that create that art. And how do you get people to create that art? You give them the resources to create it, and then you give them the space and the support to grow, right? Art is a living thing, no different than any other plant, right? You have to water it. You have to feed it. It needs sunlight. It needs space. It needs nurturing and nourishment. And no offense to you, white woman. No, but that's where I go to Black game designers. Make them. Make it. Make it. Make it, then show it. We are living in the current greatest era of social connection of any time in human history. There is absolutely no reason why people can't see or view your art, right? Now, I will flip it back to you, white woman. Do this. Talk to us.
Oh, yeah.
Don't, it doesn't have to be just a Black thing, right? And that was something that I think was cool that Ken and I had talked about. Because again, my boss, Ken, is not Black. But one of the things we did with Magusha, another guiding star, is even though this game is Afro-centric, it is not exclusive. It is welcoming. We follow a thing called the rule of cool in our design space. And the rule of cool means, does it look cool? Yeah, well, let's make it, right? Because if it looks cool, it's going to draw in everybody.
Well, back to this idea, stories are always evolving because we as people are always evolving. We know it's true and what works, the oral tradition, the original things, because nothing came without this. So I think there should be, when it comes to pop culture, like Black Panther, everybody loved Black. I remember I was teaching 6th grade. I had kids who were turning in homework so they can get a free ticket to go see Black Panther and Wakanda. And it was great. It's uplifting. But, some of those origins of Black Panther, vibranium is cobalt.
Do the kids know that?
Exactly. So we think about those things. There should be a balance. This came from this. I think pop culture is a good way to introduce children to these things, but there should be some type of grounding. It's hard to be an influencer as a storyteller. Everybody's a storyteller. I'm a digital storyteller. I'm doing this. I'm posting a reel. And so the Black oral tradition, just the oral tradition in general, it's not popular. It's not necessarily going to give you the likes, the YouTube influencer status. That's why when you see the story slams, you're going to pack out a room, but it's like, what grounds us? What do we walk away with when we come out of that? Because I think about the griot and the Jali and the Jalamusu who gathered the people, and it was something that uplifted us. Not to say that those can't be meaningful experiences, but the why. But when you go to the National Association of Black Storytelling Festival and Conference, it's probably 250, 300 people. Usually I'm the youngest person in the room, and it's always a shock because it's like, wait, you find this interesting? I was like, y'all don't even know who I am. I'm literally an old man, because then I give them the background. I was raised by that was always a thing. Who raised you? And then when they met my parents, like, oh my God, And so when you think about, that's why it's called folk art, folklore. This is about the folks. Again, as the stories I preserve, so are we. Because there's going to come a time now, I'm going to be 40 in December. And I was talking to another folk artist here in Philly. She does tap dance. And she does it with the ham bone and all that while she sings. And we were having a conversation. And I said, we're not doing this for influence, but within the next 25 years, we're going to be called on. Our parents are passing away. That's the club nobody wants to join, that nobody talks about. Our kids are growing up. We're becoming empty nesters. And COVID shifted a lot. A lot of elders passed away in families during COVID. And what's happening is we are slowly becoming the elders. And it's not about getting old, but there's a yearning of what we remember. There's a yearning of how we grew up, the people that loved us, the people that shaped us, the recipes, the moments in the yard, fixing the car, those little stories that we think about, those elders who are no longer here. We're grasping. What can we hold on to? And this generation, we're realizing as we're trying to hold on to something, the younger generation has nothing to grab in the first place. So now there's a mad grab for us. And what's going to happen in the next 15 to 25 years? They're going to call on me. They're going to call, seriously, I'm just saying not just me, but the ones who kept the culture.
Paul wrote about his work as a storyteller in a short piece he was kind enough to read to me.
This year, I spent more time with elders than I did with my peers. Missed brunches, birthdays, rooftop gatherings, group photos. I started to feel left out, and insecurity from my childhood that rose again. I then realized that the elders give the most precious pearls of wisdom off the record, in the stillness of their living rooms, away from the noise, over well-cooked pots, on creaked floors, on landline phones, in house shoes, after their morning devotion, rubbing Aspercreme on their hands, clipping coupons, feeding stray cats with the AM radio playing in the background, watching people pass by their window. No social media post, no object to represent our time together, just words to rest upon my soul, and a smile on their face because someone reminded them how important they are to this world. No one knows we are together but them, me, and the ancestors. Stay on your yacht, blasting the music, toasting with the mimosas. You can't see me, but I'll be nearby, in the depths of the ocean, gathering these pearls.
Oh, beautiful.
So this idea of, while I'm in my youth, I'm getting what I know I can't get on my own. So the time is coming, the generations are shifting. We're seeing it, the passing of the guard. We're seeing it now. And I'm just sitting here patiently waiting, because y'all gonna need this stuff. And with everything that's getting taken, y'all won't even know where to look. So I'm here as custodian of this stuff, because I'm ready to pass it out to whoever wants it.
I think a lot of times people, when they see stuff done by independent creators, you never know the level of quality or care that's into it, right? And again, go create, make more things, love it. But I think I want to come out of the gate swinging as hard as possible, so that when you guys see this, you know it's not just, oh, we made some cool drawings. No. This isn't just cool drawings. This isn't just a cool game. This isn't just cool lore. It's an entire world that is going to bring that again, if you guys support us, we'll give you more of this world. So, and as you've seen,
Yeah.
it's a pretty big world.
Magusha will be released this fall, with up to 4 commanders available at the outset and more factions and commanders planned for the future. For more information, check out Previously Pluto's website and social media. For more from Paul, Our Son Best, visit his Instagram at Our Son, that's S-U-N, Paul.